The mansion on the hill always looked quiet from the outside, as if the world had forgotten it existed. People in town barely spoke about it anymore. The tall iron gates stayed shut most days, and the long driveway was often empty, except for a single car that came and went at odd hours. Inside that mansion lived a man named Jonathan Hale and his 7-year-old twins, Ethan and Alara. Once the house had been filled with music, laughter, and bright sunlight. But those days had passed, leaving behind only silence and heavy shadows. Jonathan had been a well-known inventor, someone who built things that made life easier for thousands of people. But none of that mattered after he lost his wife 2 years earlier. Our absence had changed everything, breaking his heart in a way that seemed to echo through every corner of the house. The twins, who had once been full of energy, slowly withdrew into themselves. Not long after her passing, doctors told Jonathan something he could not understand. The twins had lost their sight. The diagnosis confused everyone. There had been no physical injury, no illness, nothing the doctors could point to. They called it a trauma response, something the mind does when it cannot cope with overwhelming pain. Jonathan didn't know what to do with this explanation, but he accepted it because it was the only one he had. From that moment on, Jonathan gave everything he had to caring for his children. He hired specialists, therapists, caretakers, anyone who claimed they could help, but nothing worked. The twins barely spoke. They rarely showed emotion. They walked slowly, relying on touch, and kept their faces turned downward, as if the world around them had simply disappeared. Caretakers came and went. Some cared for the children patiently. Others grew frustrated, insisting the twins were unreachable. Jonathan tried to be strong for them, but every day seemed to drain him a little more. He didn't sleep much, most nights. He wandered the hallways like a ghost, checking on the children again and again, hoping for a sign, any sign, that they were returning to him. One morning, after yet another caregiver packed her things and left abruptly, Jonathan stood in the kitchen with his head in his hands. He didn't know how much longer he could do this alone. The twins needed consistency. He needed help. So, after a long night of searching, he made a call to an agency that had been recommended to him by a former colleague. They promised to send someone reliable, someone patient, someone who understood children. Her name, they said, was Maria Letters. She arrived 2 days later, the day she stepped through the front door. The mansion felt slightly different, not brighter. Exactly, but as if fresh air had finally entered the rooms after a long time. Maria was not loud or overly cheerful. She carried herself quietly, with calm eyes and a gentle smile. She looked around the large entryway without seeming overwhelmed. "Thank you for coming," Jonathan said, his voice tired. "Thank you for trusting me," she replied softly. Jonathan showed her around the house, moving from room to room as he explained the routine. The twins kept to a schedule because it helped them feel secure. Breakfast at 8, learning activities late in the morning, quiet time in the afternoon. Specialists on certain days. When they reached the twins' playroom, Jonathan paused before opening the door. "They don't talk much," he said quietly, "and they don't make eye contact. They haven't since the accident. I don't know if they will respond to you right away. I don't want you to feel discouraged. Just take your time with them." Maria nodded with full understanding. "I'll be patient." Inside the playroom, Ethan and Alara sat side by side on the rug. They were identical in almost every way soft. Dark hair, round faces, curious eyebrows, but their expressions were hollow, as if a piece of them had been locked away. They didn't turn their heads toward the sound of the door. They didn't react at all. "Children," Jonathan said gently, "this is Mary Letters. She'll be helping us from now on." There was no response. Jonathan let out a quiet breath and placed a hand on Maria's shoulder as he stepped out. "I'll be in my office if you need me." Maria stayed in the room, not moving too quickly or speaking too loudly. She simply sat on the floor a few feet away from them. She didn't try to force a conversation. She didn't try to guide their hands or ask them to play. Instead, she let them exist in the same space as her. After a few minutes, she said softly, "I'm here if you need anything." Still no reaction. But Maria didn't seem bothered. Over the next few days, she made quiet progress, not dramatic change, but small shifts that only someone paying attention would notice. She learned the way the twins liked their morning oatmeal. She understood that Ethan preferred to hold onto the wall when walking down the hallway, while Alara liked to trail her fingers along the edges of furniture. She noticed Ethan hummed when he was nervous, and Alara twisted the ends of her sleeves when she didn't know how to feel. Jonathan, meanwhile, observed from a distance. He didn't want to intrude, but he found himself lingering outside rooms, listening for signs that Maria was connecting with them. It had been so long since the mansion had felt like a home. One afternoon, Maria suggested the twins spend time in the garden. Jonathan hesitated. "They haven't been outside much," he admitted. "I'm afraid they might get overwhelmed." "Fresh air might help them," Maria replied kindly. "Even if it's just a few minutes," Jonathan agreed. Together, they guided the twins to the backyard. The garden had once been a place where the children's mother planted flowers of every color. Many of them had withered, but the sunlight still touched the stone path warmly. Ethan lifted his face slightly toward the warmth. Lara's fingers brushed the petals of a surviving rose bush. It wasn't much, but Maria saw something in their expressions, not happiness exactly, but recognition, like a memory rising slowly to the surface. As days passed, Maria noticed small things that made her pause. The children moved through familiar spaces with unusual ease. They walked around toys without stepping on them. They reached for objects with surprising accuracy. Once, she dropped a spoon in the kitchen, and both twins turned their heads toward the sound so quickly that it startled her. She didn't say anything to Jonathan at first. She needed time to understand what she was seeing. One evening, after she tucked the twins into bed, she stood in the hallway thinking about it all. Maybe she was imagining things. Maybe the children had learned the house so well that they didn't need sight to move around. But something about the way they reacted didn't feel accidental. Later that night, she was cleaning up in the living room. She heard soft footsteps behind her. She turned and saw Ethan standing there, holding one of his toy cars. He didn't speak, but he looked at her just for a moment. His eyes flicked toward her face before he lowered them again. Maria froze. It was quick, barely noticeable, but she caught it. He had looked, not blindly, not vaguely, not toward the sound of her voice, directly at her. Before she could say anything, he turned and walked back toward his room. Not slowly, not feeling along the wall, he walked naturally. Yes. As if he knew exactly where he was going, Maria's breath caught in her chest. Her heart beat faster, not with fear, but with confusion. She didn't know what this meant. She didn't know what to do, but she knew one thing for certain. Something about the twins was not what it seemed. The next morning, she kept her observations to herself. She treated the twins just as gently as before, neither pushing nor questioning. But she watched, she listened, and each day revealed something new. She saw Alara glance at the clock when she thought no one was looking. She saw Ethan dodge a ball that rolled off the table. She saw them exchange silent looks as if sharing thoughts without saying a word. Maria didn't want to accuse them of anything. They were children, fragile in ways she didn't yet understand. But the more she saw, the more questions grew inside her. Why pretend to be blind? Why keep a secret like this? Why hide it from their father? She didn't have answers, not yet. But she could feel the truth waiting beneath the surface, ready to reveal itself. And she sensed that, whatever it was, would change everything in that house. For now, she simply stayed close to the children, offering them a kindness they had not felt in a long time. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, they began to trust her. Maria didn't know what the next days would bring. All she knew was that something about this family's story was far from ordinary, and she had stepped into the middle of it without even realizing. But she was not afraid. Something inside her whispered that she was. It's meant to be there, and deep within the quiet walls of the mansion. A truth was waiting to be uncovered. Maria woke up earlier than usual the next morning, long before the sun had climbed over the hills surrounding the mansion. The house was still and silent, the kind of quiet that felt almost like it was holding its breath. She made herself a cup of tea in the dim kitchen, letting the warmth settle her thoughts. There was so much she didn't understand yet, and the memory of Ethan looking directly at her the night before kept replaying in her mind. She hadn't imagined it. She knew she hadn't. But she also knew she couldn't rush anything. The twins had lived through something deep and painful. Whatever they were hiding, it wasn't simple mischief or a child's game. She could feel the weight in it. After finishing her tea, she prepared breakfast oatmeal with the exact toppings each child liked. It was a small thing, but she believed small things often mattered the most. The smell drifted through the kitchen as the first soft light of morning touched the windows. Jonathan walked in a few minutes later. He looked like he hadn't slept much. That wasn't unusual. His eyes still carried the same heavy sadness that seemed permanent. "Good morning," he said quietly. "Good morning," Maria replied. He glanced at the bowls she was preparing. "You're settling in well. I appreciate that more than you know," she smiled gently. "I'm doing my best." He nodded, though his mind seemed far away. He often drifted like that, slipping into memories or worry. Maria didn't pry. She understood that grief had its own way of controlling a person. When the twins came into the kitchen, they walked slowly, hands brushing the walls and chairs just as they always did. But now, Maria watched their movements differently. She had noticed too much to ignore it. Ethan avoided the corner of the countertop without touching it. Elara walked around the dog bed before her foot even got close. If Jonathan saw it, he didn't say anything. Maybe he had grown so used to their routines that he no longer questioned them. Breakfast went by quietly. The twins ate without speaking, though Maria noticed they seemed more aware of her presence now. Their faces lifted slightly when she placed their bowls in front of them. She even thought she saw a tiny twitch at the corner of Elara's mouth, like she wanted to smile but didn't know how anymore. After breakfast, Jonathan left for a few hours to meet one of the therapists in town. He trusted Maria enough to leave the twins in her care, though she could tell he still worried every moment he was away from them. With the house quiet again, Maria decided to spend time in the playroom. She brought along a box of soft toys and storybooks. The twins were already there, sitting on the rug in their usual positions close enough to each other to touch easily, yet far enough apart to feel like separate islands. "I found some new books," Maria said softly as she sat down. "I thought we could look at them together." Ethan didn't move, but Elara's head turned a little. Not far, but enough. Maria opened a book and began reading aloud. Her voice was calm, slow, gentle, something that children could follow without pressure. She didn't watch them directly, but she could sense their attention shifting. A few minutes later, she noticed something small but telling. As she flipped a page, Ethan's eyes flickered toward the movement. It was so quick that anyone not paying attention would have missed it completely. Maria kept her heartbeat steady. She didn't want to startle him. She simply kept reading as though nothing unusual had happened. When she finished the first book, she closed it softly. "Would you like to hear another one?" she asked. Neither child spoke, but she didn't need words. Their shoulders had loosened, and their breathing was calm. They were comfortable with her. She spent the next hour reading, playing quiet games, and just sitting near them. The more she stayed close, the more she noticed little things like how the twins subtly leaned toward her voice when she talked, or how they shifted when she moved, as if following her without meaning to. Later in the afternoon, she suggested another walk in the garden. Jonathan had told her earlier that he wanted the twins to spend more time outdoors. Even if they didn't react much, the air was crisp and fresh when they stepped outside. Birds hopped along the stone path, and the garden leaves rustled with a gentle breeze. Elara reached out and touched a flower, running her fingers over the petals in slow, thoughtful circles. Ethan tilted his head up toward the sunlight again, just as he had the day before. But something new happened this time. A bird with bright feathers landed on a branch behind them. It chirped loudly. The sound was sharp and sudden. Elara flinched, eyes flashing toward the tree. It was only for a split second, but it was enough. Maria felt her breath catch again. That look was instinctive, natural, something no blind child could control. She didn't say anything. She didn't want to frighten them. Instead, she kneeled beside them and started talking softly about the garden, describing the flowers and the weather, giving them space to feel safe. After a while, they went back inside, and Maria helped them wash their hands. The day passed calmly, but inside her mind, questions grew louder. She knew she needed to speak to Jonathan eventually, but she wanted to understand more first. She didn't want to create problems or misunderstand something important. That evening, Jonathan asked how the day had been. They were calm, Maria said truthfully. They listened to stories. They seemed comfortable. Jonathan looked relieved. That's good. That's really good. He rubbed the back of his neck, a gesture she had seen him do whenever he was overwhelmed by his feelings. I keep hoping they'll come back to me, he said quietly. Some days I think I see small changes, but then I tell myself I'm imagining it. Maria wanted to speak. She wanted to tell him everything she had observed. But something held her back. Not fear of him, but fear of hurting the children. Whatever their reason for hiding, it was strong. She could feel it. Instead, she said gently, "They're trying. It just takes time." Jonathan nodded gratefully. That night, when the house was quiet again, Maria read alone in her room, but her mind wandered back to the children. She replayed every glance, every movement, every instinctive reaction. It didn't add up. The next morning came with another puzzle. As she walked down the hallway to check on the twins, she heard whispers, soft, quick, almost like secrets floating between them. She paused outside the partially open door. She wasn't trying to spy, but the sound stopped her feet. "We can't let anyone know," a tiny voice whispered. It was Alara. What if she saw? Ethan whispered back. "She didn't," Alara said. Though she didn't sound certain, Maria's heart tightened. She stepped back quietly, giving them space before knocking softly on the door. The whispering stopped immediately. "Good morning," she said in her calmest voice. The twins sat on their beds, hands folded neatly in their laps. Their expressions were blank again. Maria guided them to the kitchen for breakfast. They kept their heads lowered, but she could sense their anxiety. Something had shifted. They were watching her more carefully, now though they tried to hide it, as the day went on. She tried to stay patient and kind, just as she had from the beginning. She noticed the tension slowly fade from their shoulders. She read to them again, played soft music, and gave them the comfort of routine. But the whispers stayed in her mind. They were hiding something. Something big later that afternoon. Something happened that she couldn't ignore. A glass cup slipped from the counter as she reached for a cloth. It fell toward the floor, before Maria could react. Ethan's hand shot out. He caught the cup, caught it, not touched it. Caught it. His eyes widened when he realized what he had done. He froze. His small fingers tightened around the glass. For a moment, time seemed to stop in the kitchen. Ethan lowered the cup slowly and placed it on the counter. His shoulders trembled. His face turned pale. Alara watched him with fear in her eyes. Real fear, not for herself, but for him. Maria took a gentle step toward him. She crouched to his level, her voice soft and warm. "It's all right," she said. "You're safe. I won't tell anyone. Not unless you want me to." Ethan's lower lip quivered. Alara reached for his hand. Maria didn't touch them. She stayed still, showing she wasn't a threat. "You're not in trouble," she whispered. "I promise." For the first time since she arrived, Ethan looked directly into her eyes. Not by accident, not by instinct, on purpose. "Please don't tell Daddy," he said, his voice trembling. Maria felt her heart break at the fear in his words. "I won't," she said softly. "Not until you trust me enough to tell me why." Alara squeezed her brother's hand tightly. The twins didn't speak again, but their looks said everything. They didn't trust adults easily. They were afraid of something, maybe someone. Before Maria could say another word, footsteps echoed down the hallway. Jonathan, the twins instantly lowered their heads again. Returning to their practiced stillness, Jonathan stepped into the kitchen with a tired smile. "Everything all right?" Maria glanced at the twins, then back at Jonathan. Her heart raced. "Yes," she said gently. "Everything is fine." But she knew. Things were no longer simple. The children could see, and they were hiding a truth that ran deeper than she had imagined. She didn't know what the next day would bring, but she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She was now part of their secret weather. She was ready or not. Maria barely slept that night. She lay awake in her room, staring at the ceiling while the house held its usual heavy silence. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Ethan catching the cup, saw the fear in his small face, saw the way his sister clung to him as if protecting him from something unseen. The twins could see. She was certain now, and they were terrified of anyone finding out. But why? What secret was heavy enough for two children to hide their own sight for years? When the first pale light of morning seeped through her window, Maria sat up and took a deep breath. She needed to move carefully. She needed to be gentle. Whatever truth the children carried, it had shaped their entire lives since their mother's passing. As she walked toward the kitchen, she heard the faint sound of Jonathan moving around. He must have woken early as well. He often did. She found him sitting at the table, staring into a cup of coffee that had gone cold. "Good morning," he said, even though he sounded far from awake. "Good morning," she replied softly. He rubbed his forehead as if trying to push away a headache. "I feel like I'm failing them," he murmured. "Every day I wonder if I'm doing enough or if I'm doing everything wrong." Maria sat across from him. She didn't give quick comfort. She knew his pain was deeper than simple reassurance. "You love them," she said quietly. "That matters more than anything else." Jonathan looked up, wearing a weary smile. "Thank you." She wished she could tell him everything she had seen. But she had made a silent promise to the children. She needed to understand their fear before she brought him into it. The twins came in a few minutes later. As usual, they entered slowly, their heads lowered, their hands brushing along familiar surfaces. But today, Maria watched them more closely than ever. Ethan moved with careful precision. Almost too careful, like someone acting a role they had practiced for a long time. Alara followed him quietly, her small fingers rubbing against the seam of her sweater. "Good morning," Maria said gently. They didn't speak, but they both inclined their heads slightly. A small acknowledgement, but it meant something. Breakfast was simple and quiet. Jonathan tried making conversation, but the twins gave no response. He sighed under his breath. Maria noticed the disappointment flicker across his face. After breakfast, Jonathan left for a short meeting with a therapist. That gave Maria time she hoped she could use to help the children feel safe enough to talk to her. She found them sitting in the playroom again, side by side. Hands resting in their laps like two little statues, Maria sat on the floor near them. She didn't move too close. She wanted them to feel in control. "I want to read you something today," she said gently. "But if you don't want to listen, that's all right too." She opened a book and read slowly, her voice steady and soft. For the first 15 minutes, the twins remained as still as ever. But then, Maria saw something change. Whenever she said something funny, Ilara's lips twitched. When she paused between sentences, Ethan leaned in slightly, listening. These were tiny signs, but they were real. After finishing the book, Maria set it aside. "I'm not going to ask you questions you don't want to answer," she said. "But I want you to know something." Both twins stilled, listening. "You're safe with me." The words hung in the air. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Ethan's hand slowly reached for Alara. She took it, their fingers curling tightly together. Maria didn't say anything else. She simply sat, giving them all the time they needed. Later that afternoon, she invited them to the garden again. This time, they didn't hesitate as much. The air was warm, carrying the scent of grass and faint traces of flowers. Ilara knelt beside a patch of clover, running her fingers through it. Ethan stood near a tree, his face tilted upward as the sunlight warmed him. Then something unexpected happened. A squirrel darted across the path. Ilara's eyes snapped toward it. She immediately caught herself, lowering her head, pretending again. But Maria had seen it clearly. "Would you like to sit on the bench for a while?" Maria asked softly, giving them a chance to relax. They followed her, moving slowly. Sat on either side of her, their small shoulders tense, but not as rigid as before. After a moment, Ethan whispered something so quietly she almost missed it. "Are you going to tell him?" Maria turned her head slightly, her voice barely more than a breath. "No, not unless you want me to." Lara looked up at her, then truly looked. Her eyes were wide, filled with fear and something else. Something heavier, promise. Her small voice trembled. I promise. Ethan swallowed hard. He can't know. Not yet. Maria nodded. You can tell me why when you're ready. The twins exchanged a look, this one open, unguarded, and full of shared fear. We saw something, Ethan whispered. Maria's pulse quickened. She didn't rush them. Elara took a shaky breath. The night, Mama. The night she... Her voice broke. She looked away again. Maria's heart tightened painfully.
Oh.
She reached over but didn't touch them. She simply let them know she was there. We saw everything, Ethan whispered. We saw what happened. Maria breathed out slowly. It must have been very scary. Neither child spoke for a few seconds. Then Ethan's voice dropped to a whisper. He saw us, and Maria felt her breath stop. Who? She asked softly, though her voice trembled. Elara's eyes filled with tears. A man. Ethan nodded. He was angry. He looked right at us. Maria felt the air shift. The garden suddenly felt too still. We told everyone we couldn't see anything, Ethan said. We told them we were blind, because if we couldn't see, then he couldn't be scared of us seeing him. Elara gripped her brother's hand so tightly her knuckles turned white. We thought he would hurt Daddy, she whispered. If he knew we remembered, Maria's heart broke completely. These children had carried something no child should ever bear. She knelt in front of them, keeping her voice steady even though her chest ached. You were very brave. More than you should have had to be. Ethan shook his head. We weren't brave. We were scared every day. Maria felt tears sting her eyes, but she blinked them away. The children needed strength, not more fear. Why didn't you tell your father? She asked gently. Elara looked down at her hands. He was so sad already. We didn't want to make it worse. Maria closed her eyes for a moment. She could. Picture it, two little children trying to protect their grieving father, hiding their own pain because they didn't want to break him further. It was heartbreaking. Listen to me, Maria said softly. You are not alone anymore. You don't have to be scared in the dark by yourselves. The twins didn't respond with words, but their breathing slowed and their shoulders softened. For the rest of the afternoon, Maria stayed with them. They didn't speak again about the man or the night of the accident. She didn't push. She knew the truth would come out slowly. When dinner time came, the twins returned to their quiet routine. Jonathan didn't notice the change in their expressions or the way they stayed close to Mary Allarders. He only saw the usual silence. That night, as Maria helped the twins get ready for bed, Elara suddenly reached out and held her hand. It was the first time she had touched Maria willingly. Thank you, she whispered. Ethan stood beside her, close enough that his shoulder brushed Maria's arm. You won't tell anyone? He asked again. Maria squeezed their hands gently. It's not until you're ready. You have my word. The twins nodded, trusting her in a way they hadn't trusted anyone for years. After tucking them into bed, Maria stepped into the hallway and leaned against the wall, letting out a long breath she had been holding inside. Herself all day, she knew now why they were hiding. She knew the truth behind their fear, but something else tugged at her heart. The man they had seen, the one who had frightened them. What if he was still out there? The thought chilled her. She returned to her room and closed the door softly. The mansion felt too quiet again, almost watchful as she sat on her bed. She whispered to herself, there's more to this. I can feel it. She wasn't wrong. Deep in the quiet night, with the wind brushing against the windows, Maria sensed something she couldn't explain, a feeling that the story wasn't just about the past. Something else was coming, and when it arrived, it would change everything for all of them. The storm that had shaken the house the night before left the air heavy and strange the next morning. But inside the mansion, everything felt even heavier. The truth that had finally come out between the children and the maid was too big to ignore. Yet it still sat like an unspoken shadow in the corners of every room. The twins stayed unusually close to her now. They followed her steps, watched her face, and stayed silent, as if waiting for something else to happen. She tried to carry on with her chores the same way she always did, but her mind kept coming back to their frightened eyes the night before. She had not seen such fear in a long time. It wasn't the fear of pretend games or a child's imagination. It was the fear of someone who had lived with danger too close for too long. Every time she wiped a counter or folded a blanket, she found herself glancing at the windows. She didn't want to panic, and she didn't want to scare the children further. But something in her heart kept warning her that the truth wasn't the end of their problems, it was the beginning. The children knew she had questions. They seemed to feel her worry before she even said anything. When she looked at them, they looked back with a kind of quiet trust, as if they knew she would protect them, even if she didn't know how yet. Late that morning, their father came downstairs, rubbing his forehead. He looked tired, like he had not slept at all. He didn't know what had happened in the hallway the night before. He still believed his children were blind. The maid knew she had to tell him the truth, but there was never a good moment, never the right opening. In every look he gave them, she saw so much pain and love that she couldn't bring herself to break him in that moment. He asked her if the children had slept well. She nodded, even though the twins had barely slept. He then asked her to help him sort out some old files and letters in his study. She followed him, but her mind stayed with the twins inside the study. He opened boxes of papers, old photos, hospital notes, and reports from doctors who had tried to explain the twins' blindness. He looked at the papers like he was reading memories he wished he could forget. He said he felt useless as a father, that no matter how much money he had, he couldn't fix what was broken. She wanted to tell him everything right there, but before she could speak, something outside the window caught her eye. A shadow. Small but sharp. Someone moving near the far side of the fence. Her breath caught. She stepped closer to the window, pretending to check the curtains. But really, she was trying to see more clearly. It wasn't one of the workers. They had left hours ago. She swallowed and forced herself to look calm before she returned to the desk. When she glanced at the children's father, he was still lost in the papers, unaware of anything outside. The rest of the day moved slowly, filled with moments that made her nerves tense. She saw footprints in the damp dirt near the garden, prints that had not been there the day before. She noticed that one of the gates was not fully closed when she brought out the trash, and when she went to check the shed, she saw that the lock had been moved slightly, as if someone had tugged on it. She kept these worries to herself until the evening after dinner. The twins were sitting on the carpet in the living room, drawing quietly. They still pretended to be blind whenever their father walked by, but once he left the room, their eyes wandered naturally. She could tell their nerves were as tight as hers. Something was wrong. They could feel it too. She finally crouched in front of them and spoke softly. "Is someone watching you?" she asked. Both children lowered their pencils. They didn't speak at first, but then the boy gave a small nod. Her stomach tightened. "When did you notice?" The girl pointed toward the windows with a trembling hand. She followed the gesture. She didn't see anyone at that moment, but that didn't ease her mind. The twins had lived in fear long enough to know danger from imagination. She stood up and marched straight to the father's study. She couldn't keep the truth from him any longer, no matter how much it hurt. He looked up from his screen when she stepped in. "Everything all right?" he asked. She closed the door behind her. "No," she said honestly. "Everything is not all right," he frowned, confused. "Is it the children? Did something happen?" She nodded slowly. Her heart raced. "Yes, they are not blind." He froze. The pen in his hand slid from his fingers and dropped onto the desk. "What are you saying?" She took a deep breath. "Your children can see. They've been pretending," shook his head and stood up. "That's impossible. The doctors didn't know what they went through," she said gently. He stared at her as if she had spoken in another language. "Why would they pretend to be blind? Why would my children lie like that?" She hesitated. "Because they thought it would keep them safe." His confusion turned into something deeper: fear, anger, heartbreak, all mixed together. Safe from what? She told him everything the twins had confessed, how they had seen the man near the accident, how they believed he was still looking for them, how they feared he would hurt their father next, how pretending to be blind made them feel hidden. He sat down again, this time with his hands covering his face. His breathing was uneven. "I failed them," he whispered. "No," she said softly. "You did your best." "You didn't know?" He looked up with red eyes. "Do they still think the man is out there?" She nodded. and I think they're right." Before he could ask what she meant, she told him everything she had seen that day, every footprint, every shadow, every strange detail that didn't fit. He didn't argue. He didn't tell her she was worrying too much. Instead, he stood and walked to the security monitors on the wall. His hands shook slightly as he rewound the footage. It took less than a minute before his face drained of color. There on the screen was a clear figure near the fence line. The camera had caught him only for a moment, but it was enough. A man dressed in dark clothes, standing too still, too close. Watching the house, the father stepped back, as if the image had struck him physically. "That's him," he whispered. "That has to be him." The maid felt a chill run through her. She didn't need to know the man's name or story. The fear in the father's voice said everything. He rushed out of the study and called the twins' names. They looked up from the floor, their eyes wide. "Is it him?" he asked. "The man you saw?" The twins didn't speak. They just nodded. He dropped to his knees and pulled them close, holding them as if he was afraid they would vanish. They held onto him tightly, their small hands gripping his shirt, and for the first time in a long time, they looked at him without pretending. The father looked up at the maid with a kind of desperate clarity. "What do we do now?" She didn't have all the answers, but she knew one thing for sure. "They can't pretend anymore," she said softly. "They need to feel safe, and you need the truth to protect them." He nodded slowly, still holding the twins. "Then we face this together." The room felt tighter, the night darker, and the air heavier than before. But something had changed. The truth was out. The danger was real, and the family was finally facing it side by side. But outside, unseen by all of them, a man stood just beyond the reach of the lights. He watched the house with quiet patience, as if waiting for the right moment, and that moment was getting closer. The house grew quieter after the truth came out. But it was not the kind of quiet anyone wanted. It was the kind that made every sound sharper, every shadow darker, every small movement feel important. The maid could feel it the moment she stepped downstairs the next morning. Even the air felt tense, as if the walls were holding their breath. The twins stayed close to their father now. There was no more pretending. Their eyes followed every noise, every shift in the house. And their father, though trying to stay calm for them, was restless. He checked every window, every lock, every camera, and kept glancing outside as though expecting someone to appear. The maid did her best to keep the day feeling normal for the children. She made breakfast the way they liked, turned on soft music in the kitchen, and tried to distract them with small tasks. But the children didn't want to be far from their father, not even for a moment. The father finally sat down with the maid in the living room, while the twins rested on the couch. His voice was quiet, but steady. "I've called the security company. They'll send someone this afternoon to check the cameras again." She nodded, though she felt that would not be enough. Not when someone had already stepped so close. He looked at his hands. "I should have known something was wrong. I should have seen it." "You saw what you could," she said gently. "You were trying to protect them. They were trying to protect you." Everyone was just scared, gave a small, tired smile. "And now?" "Now we protect them together," she said. The rest of the morning passed slowly. The children colored, though they kept looking toward the windows. The maid cleaned, though she stayed within sight of the family. And the father checked the cameras over and over. Around noon, the maid went outside to bring in a package. The wind was soft, but the air still felt heavy. She looked toward the fence, half expecting to see someone there, but the yard was empty. Then she turned to go back inside. Something caught her eye, a small piece of black cloth. Stuck on the edge of a bush, she froze at it. It didn't look like something that belonged in the yard. It looked like part of a sleeve torn, snagged, left behind by someone moving too quickly. She stepped closer, but didn't touch it. Her heart began to pound. She backed away and hurried inside. "There's something outside," she whispered to the father. He went pale, then followed her to the window. When he saw the torn fabric, he pulled out his phone. "I'm calling the police." "Duh." The maid nodded. "Good, and maybe we should all stay together in one room." he agreed. They gathered the twins and went to the study, which had only one entrance and no ground-level windows. It felt safer, even if only slightly. The police arrived 15 minutes later. 2 officers searched the grounds while another spoke with the father. They collected the cloth piece, made notes, promised to increase patrols in the area. But the maid could see it in their eyes. They weren't sure the man would return. They thought it might have been a random passerby or a hiker who got too close. But she knew better. And so did the twins. After the police left, the father sat heavily in the armchair. "They don't think it's serious," he said quietly. The maid looked at him. "But we do." He nodded, understanding. The afternoon slipped by, slow and uneasy. The security company sent a worker who checked the cameras, replaced a few wires, and reassured the father everything was functioning well. But machines couldn't calm the feeling in the... As evening approached, the maid made dinner, though no one was very hungry. The twins picked at their plates. Their father barely ate. Even the quiet of the house felt louder than usual. The sun lowered. The sky dimmed. And the shadows outside grew longer. The maid tried to busy herself by clearing the table. The twins went to the living room with their father. He tried reading them a story, but the children kept looking toward the doorway. Then, as the last bit of daylight faded, a loud noise echoed from outside. A sharp crack. The maid froze in the kitchen. The father stood up. Immediately, the twins ran to him and grabbed his arms. He looked toward the sliding door that led to the back garden. "Stay here," he whispered, but the maid shook her head. "No, we stay together," hesitated, then nodded. Another sound came, this one softer. Like footsteps, the maid's breath caught in her chest. She moved closer to the children. The father stepped in front of all of them. He grabbed his phone, ready to call the police again, just as he lifted it. The lights in the house flickered, then went out. Darkness swallowed the room. The twins gasped, clung to their father. The maid reached out, finding the children's shoulders. "It's all right. I'm here." But her own heart was racing. The father whispered, "The generators should have kicked in." They didn't. The house stayed dark. Then, through the sliding door, a shape moved. Not close enough to see clearly, just a shadow crossing through what little moonlight touched the yard. The father slowly reached for the nearby drawer where he kept a flashlight. He turned it on, the beam cutting through the darkness. He pointed it at the door. Nothing, just the glass. The garden. In a stillness that felt wrong, the maid whispered, "We should go upstairs." "The panic room." The father nodded, his voice tight. "Yes, stay behind me." They moved carefully through the dark house. Every creak of the floor sounded louder. Every step felt longer. The twins clung to the maid's sweater. The father walked ahead with the flashlight. They reached the stairs as they began to climb. A thud came from the back of the house. A door. A heavy door. The maid felt the twins grip her tighter. "Go," the father whispered. Quickly, they reached the second floor and hurried down the hallway to the hidden panic room door. The father pressed his hand against the small panel, and it clicked open. Inside, he whispered. The maid guided the twins in. She was about to step inside too, when something made her turn. A shadow moved at the far end of the hallway. Shape, tall, slow. Someone was inside the house. The father saw her frozen stare and turned quickly. His voice dropped to a whisper. "Close the door." But the children cried, "No," and reached for him. He looked at them, torn between fear and love. Then the shadow stepped closer. Still distant, but real. The father pushed the maid and the twins fully inside and said, "Stay with them, please." Before she could pull him in, he shut the door. The maid gasped. "No, wait." She banged on the door. "Open it. Don't do this." The twins sobbed, calling for him, inside the small hidden room. They could hear footsteps outside, slow, heavy. Moving closer, the maid wrapped her arms around the children and whispered, "It's going to be okay. Your father is right outside. He's not leaving us." Her words were meant to comfort them, but her voice shook. Then another sound, a loud shout, a struggle, something falling. A crash, the twins covered their ears. The maid held them tighter. Then sirens, loud, fast. Police. The noise outside the panic room grew louder, running steps. Voices calling out, orders being shouted. Minutes passed, though they felt like hours. Finally, 3 knocks on the panic room door. Police. It's safe now. Open up. The maid's knees weakened with relief. She opened the door cautiously. Officers stood in the hall, flashlights bright, and behind them the father. He was shaken, but okay. He rushed forward, pulling the twins into his arms. The maid let out a breath she had been holding since the lights went out, one officer told them. They had caught the intruder hiding near the basement door. Another officer said the man matched the description the children had given. The danger was finally over. The family stayed together for the rest of the night, all in one room, with officers guarding the house. When the sun finally rose, the children stepped outside for the first time without fear in their eyes. The father held their hands. The maid stood beside them, and together they watched the new day begin. For the first time in a long time, there was light in their lives again. The children looked up at their father with open, unhidden eyes, and he looked back at them with a kind of hope he thought he had. Lost forever. The danger had passed. The truth had healed them, and the strange, quiet bond between the maid and the family had changed everything. She was no longer just someone who worked in the house. She was part of it, part of them, and now, finally, they were ready to live again.